In this video, I'll show you how we spruced up these two upstairs bedrooms by adding some paneling. And I also updated some of the outlets and light switches. The main goal of this project is to help hide those crooked lines along the ceiling and also help mask the fact that where the slanted roof meets those short walls, those lines aren't straight either. As you can see, the walls are looking kind of rough with nails and drywall tape and other cracks and bumps showing as well. So we want to hide those. So let's go shopping. So here are the 4x8 sheets of beadboard to go on the walls and along the ceiling. Here are some 1x3 by 8 foot trim pieces on an incredible sale. Here's the trim sealant to help hide any gaps. And finally, the panel board nails. On a later shopping trip, I also had to buy some liquid nails and these trim head screws. And at the house, we already had some of these 2-inch nails on hand. Since we're going to be attaching beadboard and trim to the walls and the ceiling, I first want to mark the location of all the studs so I can make sure to attach them to something solid. This is a very simple stud finder that uses magnets to find the nails and screws holding the drywall to the studs. Make sure to transfer your stud lines up above so that you know where to nail the trim board. Neither of these beadboards are level at all, sitting on the existing trim. So what we're going to have to do is just cut a little wedge out of the bottom to make this more like that, which you can see it's a significant wedge. And our main concern here is making this level because we want these lines of the beadboard to be perfectly vertical. And here it's not at all. So here we see this would have to go out. So that is how far off of vertical that is. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to mark where this one ends. Now I'm holding this beadboard up off the trim so that the edge of it is vertical. And now I'm going to mark on the wall where the bottom of this is, and then that way I can measure it and see how much I need to cut off. Here we can see it's a wedge that goes up to 1 inch on one side. I always like to draw an arrow to remind myself which corner is going to have the widest part of the wedge. And this is the opposite corner from where the measurement was taken on the wall. Once you measure the offset of your circular saw, it's very easy to use a piece of the trim to guide it to make a straight cut. These are now vertical. Perfect. And that should fit along the bottom quite nicely. All right, and that's the first one in. The next one should be easier because you just have to line it up with the previous one and hold it. And you can see it's well off the trim, off the baseboard, and you just have to draw a line on the wall and measure and then cut another wedge off again. There we go. Look at that. I was so focused on how I was lining up with the baseboard that I didn't realize that this was the wrong side. We should have another one of these right here. So make sure you're lining up the right side. It should look more like that. At the beginning, I naively thought this was going to go very quickly because I assumed the baseboards would be level, but each piece I had to cut to fit. And the original plan was to put the trim right along the top of this beadboard, but as you can see, it is no longer even. I'm going to use a little bit of liquid nails here on the seam just because this moves a little bit. So I got it pried open and I'm going to squeeze a little bit in there to hold it tight. So for this outlet, I just measured from the other beadboard and then transferred it to here. I also measured from the baseboard to get the approximate location, and then I've marked the middle, and then what I'm going to do now is drill that hole and see if it lines up with that. And now we can see the screw is actually right there. So the hole is a little to the right of where it should be. I've shifted the box 1/8 of an inch to the left. All right, so that hole lines up really well. And now we just need to get the outlet to sit on the outside of the board. And then I always check to make sure that's not working. So that outlet is definitely powered off. There we go, perfect. So as long as these tabs hit the beadboard, it can stay flush with the beadboard, and then the plate will sit on nicely. And then sometimes the cuts are much easier. It's much easier to put these nails in before you put it up on the wall. Now that the trim is overlapping the beadboard, I've cut some strips of beadboard to make sure that it's a flat surface behind it. Make sure to put any joints in the trim at a stud. Here's where the trim sealant comes into play and helps make any unsightly gaps disappear. After smoothing it out with a finger, it looks like this. You can of course use it on the joints between the beadboard as well. So one of the main goals of putting on this beadboard here was to help hide the fact that this ceiling line was really wavy. And to do that, we actually made it so that this board was not straight. If you look at it from the side, you can see how it bows a bit there to try and match the contour of the ceiling a bit. But from further away, at least I don't feel you can really tell. And especially once the ceiling's painted white. But for the ceiling, I think this is trickier because down there it goes from about 20 inches to about 17.5 on this end. And you can see it waves there. And I'm concerned that, coming into the room, it'd be much easier to see that this line doesn't go straight than it would be to tell that this line is going straight. So yeah, this makes the ceiling part a little bit trickier. All right, gonna use some liquid nails on this first ceiling panel up there. So let's just put a few little circles around. On the walls, I didn't care so much, but for the ceiling, I've made it so that this first beadboard panel ends at a stud. Let's do more along the seam. And this is the side that goes against the wall because it's already cut. And that goes to the next panel. There's the first ceiling tile glued in. And before we positioned it, we put another piece against here to make sure that it continued lining up with these. And so this should be a very good setup for the rest of the beadboard panels to go in on the ceiling. You can't see it here, but I've pounded some of those nails into the beadboard so that they're already in it while I'm holding it up against the ceiling. And then the trim along the side is going to help hide all this ugly drywall mess. I used cardboard as a template to help make this piece fit, and here you can see the nails that I started to make it easier. A view of the ceiling panels before putting in the trim. Just using a piece of cardboard to try and get the right angle. So it needs to be at an angle as well. After a couple passes, a couple iterations, that's looking really good. I want to get that far end cut to the right angle so that I can then come back here and mark where I need to cut it. Because if I cut it to the right length and then had trouble getting that angle right, this board would have gotten shorter and shorter. So really happy with how this side came out. That looks really straight. With this side here, you can see it looks like it bends right where we join the two boards. And it's really annoying. So what we might do is pull these off and then actually move these up to overlap the beadboard a bit, which means they'll be sitting at a bit of an angle and have a gap between this and the drywall. But I think that will help us achieve the angle that we want without getting huge gaps. So on this side, we've overlapped the trim with the beadboard. And it gives it a nice clean look in here. And also gives us more wiggle room when we're trying to make things go straight. And to me, that looks pretty darn straight. Here, of course, you can see the gap between the drywall and the trim when we have the trim hit the beadboard. I've also tried using the circular saw to cut a notch off of the back of this trim to see if that would help in putting it up here. So then I thought it'd give us a little bit more wiggle room, but I'd actually have to cut quite a bit off of there. And it's not so easy with the circular saw. I really recommend these trim head screws for securing that in there. These have worked really well. Now I'm pulling down the trim board in order to remove the nails and replace them with the trim screws. And then I want to make it overlap the beadboard. I eventually figured out to put a box underneath the drill so it's easier to reach. So here's the ceiling with a new light installed too. Gonna replace some of these switches and outlets around the room because now that looks really ugly on that wall. With all things electrical, always be super careful and always make sure that the circuit is switched off at the breaker panel. Just trying to show the basics of replacing a light switch. These are pretty simple because there are typically just 2 wires and it doesn't matter which one goes where. And all you have to do is connect them to the new switch. Most of these outlets in the room only had 1 set of wires coming to it, so these were very simple to replace as well. Again, always make sure that these are powered off. For the outlets, the wires do matter. The black wires are live and the white wires are neutral. And on the back of each outlet, you'll see that the terminals are labeled and it will specify where the black wire needs to go and where the white wire needs to go. What a difference. Okay, if you ever find any wires this color, it's time to take a Scotch-Brite pad or some sandpaper to it before you connect it back up again. Ideally, all of these outlets would also be grounded, but as you can see, there wasn't always the ground wire. So it should look a lot more like copper rather than that. Okay, that is looking a lot better. So this one has 4 wires coming into it, and it's probably because the main line comes in here, and then it connects here, and then it daisy chains to the other outlets around the room. And here you can see I had the wire coiling around clockwise so that when you screw it in, it gets tighter. Same there. And same on this side. The wire comes in from the top on this side, curves around. You can also level the outlets before you tighten the screws. Here's a reminder of where we started and where we finished for both of these rooms. I hope this video has been helpful for you. Overall, this probably cost about $400 and took at least 16 hours. Here are some of the things I learned in doing this project. And thanks for watching.